Beyond the Fence Line, a podcast brought to you by the Texas Agricultural Land Trust. Created by landowners for landowners, we're proud to play a role in conserving the Texas legacy of wide open spaces.
Welcome to Beyond the Fence Line. I'm your host, Andy James, and today we're tackling a pressing issue in Texas, wildlife and drought. Our special guest today is Thomas Janke, the Texas State Coordinator for Quail Forever and Pheasants Forever, who happens to also be a longtime friend of mine. Together, we'll try to understand the challenges that wildlife face during drought and discover the innovative strategies used to protect Texas's incredible ecosystems. Thomas, I'd like to welcome you to the podcast today, and if you want to take a minute to tell us a little about yourself.
Yeah, good morning, and Yaksamash, and buenos dias, all that fun stuff, Andy. I was actually thinking about this the other day, and shoot, I guess we've known each other coming up on 12 plus years now, from good old Sol Ross and BRI days. So appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Yes, sir. Yes, it's been a few years since we first met, and it's interesting that we're both kind of where we are today, and a lot of that stems back from when we first met each other. So let's go ahead and dive into this deal today if you want to. We're going to try to understand the drought, maybe in its effects on wildlife. So as we kind of jump right in, just how severe is the drought in Texas right now, and then maybe we'll talk about some ecological impacts that drought may be causing.
Yeah, great point, Andy. Drought is, as we well know, especially this summer, is on a lot of people's minds, whether you're a cattleman or woman, a wildlife enthusiast, or somebody out there worrying about wildfire right now. So it's a hot topic of conversation. And really, we're talking about drought and wildlife and rainfall so many times. When we're getting rain, it makes most wildlife biologists look like we know what the heck we're talking about. Same with the rancher, same with so many other entities. Whereas when we don't, that's when the good management really shows through on when the environment's stressed. How do those range conditions look? How do those body conditions on livestock and or wildlife look? And what can we learn from that? And so many others before me and you have said this, and I'm going to repeat it. The best time to start managing for drought was yesterday. It's not when it's dry. It's even when it's raining. You need to be thinking about how can we manage for the future, knowing that drought is inevitable, but it's also periodic. Actually,
it's not something that we're going to get away from. It's going to happen, and probably happen more often than not. I actually looked up some data this morning off of the U.S. Drought Monitor, and I thought it was pretty interesting that here we are, and it's August 14th. We know that that's a dry time of the year, but right now about 86% of Texas is in some level of drought, and about a third of the state, about 35%, is actually considered to be in a severe or greater drought. So there's a large portion of the state that's pretty dry right now. We're seeing that especially down through the central part of the state. And like I said, that's August. That's part of life in Texas. It's going to be hot. It's going to get dry this time of the year. But I think looking towards management of wildlife, we've got to be able to plan ahead for that. We know it's coming. Now let's plan ahead for it and make sure we know how to deal with it. But let's talk about maybe some of those ecological impacts. Some of those are pretty obvious, but is there any that kind of as we get deeper into this that maybe some people don't consider or think about very often?
Yeah, well, I think first of all, let's dive into identifying what exactly drought is. And I was doing a little bit of homework trying to make sure I was a little bit more educated on this subject. But drought is a relative term. It's a period of drier than average or drier than normal conditions that may be affecting your water table content, soil moisture, natural resource production, et cetera. But it's not a set amount. And as Texas as big as it is, you have to understand that across the state, drought is going to mean different things. In reaches of far west Texas or in the Trans-Pecos, their average rainfall in places might be less than 10 inches a year. Whereas on the other side of the state, far east Texas, their average rainfall may be over 50 inches a year. So a drought in far west Texas and a drought in far east Texas are two different things. East Texas still might be getting 40 plus inches of rain, which would be torrential flooding in far west Texas. And West Texas may be a year get 15 inches of rain, and that would still be a beyond severe drought in East Texas. So it's all relative. It's all perspective on what that average is for an area. Another thing to take into consideration is it's not just average annual rainfall. It's the timing and the amount that rainfall occurs. So, for instance, in the Panhandle this year alone, so much of weather conditions and wildlife management, et cetera, goes on trends. The last 2 years have trended towards below average rainfall, and it's been tough. And we've had, for the most part, whether you're talking deer, you're talking quail, you're talking non-game species, we've likely had some low recruitment or birth rates, and then just individuals making it to a breeding population. And then in the Panhandle this year, I mean, dry. Come April, May this year, I mean, they had quite a bit of rain, in some places over 20 inches of rain in less than a week period. And so they went from feast to famine when it came to water, but then now it's dry again, and conditions are very, very dry. They haven't had much water, so some of the playa lakes are still holding a little bit of water. Most are already dry. Most of the farmers are plowing their crops under. And so it's not just purely the amount of rain, but when and how that comes. Because it's one thing to get 20 inches of rain, but it's another thing to get 20 inches spread out throughout all year versus happening in a less than a week period. So that's I just wanted to kind of hit on that first, that one, it varies across the state on what that average annual rainfall is. And then two, it's not just about the average annual rainfall, but when and how it comes. And is that an amount that's able to be soaked in, utilized? Is it an amount that's purely runoff because our ground can't absorb it, or it doesn't have the ability to slow it down? Or is it kind of a mix in between and spread out throughout multiple weeks and multiple seasons throughout the year, and it can be best utilized before running into the Gulf?
Absolutely. No, I agree with you on that. And I think we've seen similar type situation here in Central Texas, where really the last 2 years we've had similar amounts of rainfall through the first 7 months of the year. But this year, we saw almost all of it occur in a 2-month period between April and May. And whereas last year it was just a little bit here and there. And so we did produce some good herbaceous vegetation early on there, kind of late spring, early summer. But here over the last 3 months, it's been pretty tough. Well, let's talk about some of the challenges that this creates for wildlife. And maybe if you want to talk about, we can kind of stay broad, or if we get into maybe some migratory birds, upland game bird type situations.
Absolutely. Well, I think that question goes back to, what are the resources that wildlife need? And so we like to coin that as habitat. And so habitat is that spatial arrangement of food, water, and cover. And now we can spend a lot of talking on each of those, but we're going to focus on water right now. And so different species are going to have different water needs. And water can come in 3 different forms for wildlife. And not all species get all 3 forms. Some specialize in certain ones, but the most common one that people think of is coined as freestanding. That's going to be the water you see on the surface, be it in a lake, a river, a creek, a stream, a pond, a guzzler, a man-made catchment device for water, et cetera. But it is freestanding water that some form of wildlife can go drink. Another form of water is going to be that preformed water. And now preformed water includes that the water that animals are able to absorb directly from their food and other things that they eat. So the waters are, kind of, there's moisture in that plant or in that resource that they're consuming. So that's preformed water. And the last one is metabolic water. So metabolic water is when an animal starts digesting, they are actually able to create water or obtain water from cellular respiration and dehydration. So again, there's three forms of water: freestanding, metabolic, and preformed. And there's so much we're learning about wildlife, and really realize there's so much we little know. But these animals have been here. They've evolved for years and years and years. Now, that's not to say they can make it without water, because it's very obvious that many, many species do better when there is all forms of water available, especially freestanding. But just because we're in a drought does not mean that it's all doom and gloom. Quail, for instance, especially blue quail or desert quail, they're adapted to living in that Chihuahuan desert or areas that receive, let's say, less than 15 inches of rainfall a year. There's not necessarily a lot of freestanding water. If it's there, will they drink it? Sure. But they are more so adapted to obtaining metabolic and preformed water. Now, you mentioned migratory birds, and something that hits on both of you in my mind. We're 2 weeks away from dove season, and I'll tell you right now, I'm starting to think, what is it that's going to give me the best place to hunt doves? And with it being as dry as it is right now, it's probably going to be a stock tank with some of the other habitat needs of a dove. And Lord knows that, and I'll gladly accept it, but we're likely to get some kind of weather fronts and some kind of rain events probably the last week of August to screw up whatever patterns we think we can observe from doves as we figure out where we think we might hunt them come Labor Day weekend. So definitely things to consider. What are those needs of wildlife? Do they require freestanding water? And if so, and we don't naturally have it, are there things we as landowners and conservationists can do to provide water? And absolutely. But is it always a good thing to provide water? And I think that's something to take into consideration as well. In some instances, absolutely. But in other instances, if and when you provide, let's say, the one and only drinking source of water for miles around, you have the potential of concentrating a lot of species that may not otherwise be together. And so maybe that increases disease transmission. Maybe that increases your chance of predation. So definitely things to consider. And, some ranches, especially out in arid places, talking deserts, be it in Texas or out of state, will actually design drinking waters with grates over the top, so animals with long muzzles, such as their livestock, sheep, etc., can access it, but flat-faced animals such as mountain lions can't. They want to be able to have the water accessible for the animals they want to manage for, but they also want to deter the animals they don't want there, so they have to move on and stay out of their area. So in that case, they were actually using water as their benefit or lack of water to help kind of deter predation.
I want to go back and touch on one thing that you kind of just brought up there, but I think this is a good place to talk about it, as I think we both have some experience with this situation. But let's go back and talk about the freestanding water and what can we do as managers when we don't have that. And one of the things that comes to my mind is wildlife water guzzlers. And I know you got some good experience with those out in the Trans-Pecos, out in some bighorn sheep country, but I think we also see them, and they're becoming maybe more useful, or I'm seeing more people utilize them even back in toward the central part of the state. They come in all various forms and sizes, shapes, and they really can be pretty simple, but yet very, very effective opportunities to create water sources in places where they're not readily available.
Yes, sir. So for those who aren't familiar with it, they go by multiple names, but again, a guzzler, right? Let's just simplify that right now. A water catchment device, where Andy was talking about when him and I were both out at Sul Ross and out in the Trans-Pecos, it was very common for groups to purposely build these water catchment devices or guzzlers in remote areas for wildlife, be it bighorn sheep, mule deer, etc. And then those they come in all kind of various forms, but the idea is to catch water, to store water, and to have it accessible to wildlife. And then those different trough styles and the different tank placements gave them a wide array of options. Regardless of where you build waters, I think, or these water catchment devices, and they don't have to be freestanding. You can use existing things, be it your house roof, your shed, et cetera, your gutter system, and be able to store that. I actually have one out in my pasture right now that I was hoping to be able to track the deer, knowing that, hey, I live in Coleman County and it tends to be pretty dry out here, and hoping that by having water would, be one less limiting resource for the wildlife when the ponds didn't hold water. And so something to take into consideration is one, what is your ability to catch water? Two, store water. And then when you do have a trough, do you have the ability for wildlife of all sizes, not just big game, not just birds, but even your lizards, et cetera, to easily get in and out of it? Because if wildlife are thirsty just like us, they're going to find a way to get to it. It's kind of a, especially if they're requiring it and not die. But you don't want to make a trap either where they could fall into a trough and not get out. So it's really important to, one, do your best to keep the water. If it's not at the very top of the rim where wildlife could potentially swim or paddle to the edge and crawl out, make some kind of ramp, be it with rocks, be it with sticks, be it with expanded metal, etc. But have some kind of escape device, because you don't want an animal to get in there, die, and then taint your water where it's potentially toxic or at least makes other animals sick by there being decaying matter in it. So points to take into consideration of, what can get to it, and when they can get to it, can things get out and not get trapped in it? And that doesn't matter where you're at in the state. So just having the ability to keep it clean and then clean it out occasionally.
Absolutely. And then I just want to reiterate, there's some of these water catchment systems that are pretty significant in size, 40 foot by 40 foot or even maybe even bigger. But especially in wetter parts of the state, some of these systems are maybe 6 foot by 8 foot, two pieces of 10 slapped on top to make a little roof, and maybe you have a 55-gallon barrel that you can store your water in. Everything can be gravity fed. They're very simple systems and very effective. But depending on where you're at, and obviously the amount of rainfall that you do get, you can adjust the sizes of those facilities, and they don't have to be very big. They don't have to be very costly to be beneficial. Let's talk about some other strategies maybe wildlife kind of utilize when they do run into drought. Let's discuss how maybe various types of species are able to adapt, change their behaviors, utilize different habitats. Maybe it's changing migration patterns. But let's maybe dive into a little deeper talk about what some of these strategies might be for wildlife. And then if we have some specific examples of maybe how different species are doing that.
Absolutely. So I think it's really important to one, think about a species' needs. And what I mean by that is, we think of seasons calendar based. We think of spring, summer, fall, winter. But from a species standpoint, we need to think about what are their life cycle needs. And some animals are a lot longer lived or shorter lived than others. I mean, quail, you might have a couple year life cycle. Deer, you might have a decade long life cycle. So it's really going to depend, but it boils down to there's likely going to be a breeding season, a nesting or a gestation season, and then I'm going to say a young rearing season, whether it's chicks, whether it's fawns. You got some kind of season in where there's additional effort and needs to take care of the young. And then there might be a season where they're needing to store up reserves, be it body fat, et cetera, in preparation for winter, or for males, or for birds growing new plumage, or for animals like deer growing antlers. So there's different needs throughout different times of year. So when drought occurs, it's not so much what time of calendar season does it occur in, but what life cycle season does it occur in the animal. And so, for instance, with deer, when they are stressed, be it nutritionally, be it water conditions, et cetera, they've evolved to, if they may reabsorb or abort their fetuses. And so that mother can live, because though that sounds harsh, animals have two basic thought processes. I have to survive and I have to reproduce. Well, you can't reproduce if you don't survive. And so in an instance like that, sometimes whether the young are being developed, or maybe they don't even breed because they're just not nutritionally fit to do it. That's one of the adaptations is, hey, we gotta survive so we can wait for better conditions to do this again. Other species such as quail, when it's raining, it's not uncommon to have multiple successful nests in a season. Conditions are right, they may be laying and hatching eggs in the spring, then they'll do another one in the summer, and then potentially a third successful nest in the late summer, early fall. It just really depends. And so it's one of those, they've evolved to, one, take advantage of when times are good, but when times are rough, they're going to cut down on the number of young that they rear, or that the amount of antlers they grow, or the amount of resource they do. And it's unfortunate. Yeah, that's natural selection. Things don't make it. But when conditions are good, they're able to reproduce a higher number to make up for those times that are bad. So yes, right now the last 2 years have been really dry. And you got to ask yourself, well, was it dry leading up to the breeding season or nesting season? Was it dry during the winter? When were those animals most stressed? Right now, we had a pretty good spring throughout Texas. I'd say April through early June was average, if not above average, throughout a lot of the state. I think a lot of people have been excited when it comes to species such as quail or turkey or possibly even deer, saying, hey, I'm hearing quite a few birds, or I'm seeing quite a few young, and that's fantastic. They had the right amount of rain at the right time to produce the right needs for those animals to successfully put young on the ground. Now it's a matter of, how were things managed leading up to this drought or during this rain event? Is there remaining habitat to get them through these dry times? Do they have the cover, be it from brush, be it from grass, etc., so they can have those food resources even if it's dried out, or they can have that screening cover from predators, or especially from the sun, and they can survive these 105 plus degree days. So a lot goes into it, but just know that animals have evolved to survive, and they have evolved to reproduce young, especially when conditions are suitable.
Well, those are some great points, Thomas. Let's kind of transition. Let's talk about maybe the role of what conservation organizations can do. How can folks like Quail Forever, Pheasants Forever, Texas Ag Land Trust, and many, many others, what are some things that are being done and can be done in the future to help mitigate these impacts of drought on wildlife?
Well, Andy, you bring up some great points yourself there, and one is there's a lot of players to this, and no one can do it on their own. And so that power of partnership, and especially with Texas being what it is, 95+% privately owned. You got organizations that are looking at it from the landowner rights and having the abilities to keep these working lands working. And also having organizations being real specific, how can we best manage for those natural resources that are there? And, come to mind, we got NRCS, so the Natural Resource Conservation Service, Texas Parks and Wildlife, Quail Forever, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and many, many more. That, different folks have kind of their different niches, but ultimately we're striving for the same goal. We want to have healthy wildlife, healthy, abundant, resilient wildlife populations that can make it through whatever changes are come about them. We want to have clean air for not only them but us to utilize. We want to have water. We want to have food and fiber, and we want to do this, especially as our population continues to grow. So we're needing to get smarter and smarter about how we manage what we have, our resources on our lands, so that we can all utilize them and work together. And so when it comes to wildlife, what does an organization such as the one I work for do, which is, again, Quail Forever and Pheasants Forever? They're one and the same. But we really work with the landowner and try to figure out, hey, one, what are your goals? And if it does consist of wildlife and range management and all working with these natural resources, how can we best do that? And as we mentioned before, we don't have any control over the weather. As much as we'd like to, we don't. We don't know. I wish we had the ability to turn off and on that sprinkler system and lower these temperatures probably 10, 20 degrees right now. But, we don't have control of that. But what we do have control over is how we manage our lands. And so we first need to realize, hey, what are the goals we have? Is it wildlife? Is it farming? Is it ranching? Whatever the case may be, really sit down and identify what those goals are. And then how can we best look at them from kind of what's our game plan moving forward, not just short-term thinking, but longer-term thinking, 5+ years, and knowing that management is an active process. Just as well as I do, Andy, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners know this as well. There's no silver bullet answer. There's no single project that can be done, be it putting out a guzzler, be it planting perennial grasses, be it deferred grazing, be it increased grazing. There's no one-time fit-all solution. And so we really just need to be active in allowing the land to teach us and us being willing to learn what are the needs, and also willing to say, hey, we might need to reduce our stocking rate, or we might need to harvest more animals or not harvest quail this year. We might need to, maybe it is beneficial to supplementally feed or do water, whatever the case may be. We need to be learning from the land, and we need to just be open-minded to saying, hey, it knows what it needs a whole lot better than we do. And an organization such as ours can help people identify that, have those conversations, and then on top of that, come up with a management plan. And if somebody's eligible and interested in some financial assistance opportunities, we can help people apply for those, be it state funds, federal funds, or even local community funds. And that's where we come in.
Good deal. Well, I think that's great. And that there's a lot of opportunities out there to help the wildlife and help the landowners. Let's kind of build on top of that. What are some ways that we can engage the community, maybe educate the community? And I'm thinking from that perspective of those that are outside the agriculture or wildlife world, if you want to call it that. What are some things that we can do to help those people understand what's really going on when in terms of wildlife and the impacts that are being made by drought and other natural causes out there?
I think so much of it's education, and we don't know what we don't know, and until we have a better understanding of it, we're not going to care about it and choose to do something about it. And water's such a topic that can tie us all together, whether it be for wildlife, whether it be for drinking water, whether it be for the flowers somebody has in their yard. It doesn't matter. All life needs water in some form. And so knowing that water is a common theme between everybody, and we can agree upon, hey, we need to best utilize, best conserve, best manage what we have. It's a powerful link between us. It doesn't matter if you're for hunting against it, you're for ranching against it, live in a city, live in an urban area. We all need water. And I think especially in a state like Texas, where we have the majority of people, the majority of our population, majority of our voting individuals living in a very small proportion of our state. And TALT and others would know those statistics better than me, so I'm not going to try to rattle them off. But it's really important for people to realize, hey, that drinking water doesn't come from a water tower. It doesn't come from a faucet. It comes from our reservoirs. It comes from our groundwater, our aquifers. And that water right there is made possible on how we manage our working lands across the state. When that water falls from the sky and it hits that soil, that plant, what does it do next? Does it immediately run off, get into our stream system and make its way down to the Gulf? Does it evaporate does it have a chance to slow down, percolate, be utilized by our vegetation and by our animals, by our wildlife? Does it have the ability to recharge our aquifers and our natural swimming holes, be it Balmorhea or Barton Springs or others? Does it have the ability to go into that drinking water resource? And so just having those education events on, where does our water come from? Where are those recharge zones? How is that being impacted by our current management, past management, and what do we choose to do in the future are all things that we can do no matter where you live in the state.
Absolutely. Well, I want to cover one more topic here before we kind of come to a conclusion. But the topic I want to discuss next is about policy. I think we can go in a lot of different directions here, but what kind of role could policy play into helping us to effectively address these challenges that are dealing with drought and wildlife? One, there's funding for some of these options, right? For some of these management opportunities. There's that funding, while we don't think about it as an impact directly to, on drought, but if funding can be put into various management opportunities, then we can help improve that habitat so that when we have a drought, those impacts are minimized. Another one that comes to my mind right off the bat is just drought response plans. And we see that on a large scale, but we also see it at local scales too. And we're dealing with one right here in Central Texas where many of the cities and communities have gone from a level 1 drought plan to a level 2 or level 3 drought plan. And then they're as things become drier and water resources become impacted at higher levels, those cities are putting in drought response plans that ultimately are going to make sure that there's water in the lakes forever, so that we've got fish. I mean, things like that definitely come into my mind for sure. Maybe that'll spur some other things that you might have thought about.
It absolutely did, and I appreciate that. Yeah. Anytime you're talking to somebody who works for a non-government organization or even an agency, you start talking policy. It's like, well, what don't want to get on either side of the fence on this one. But you are absolutely correct. When you started talking about different legislation or different funding opportunities, I think the big one, and especially right now coming up, whether people realize it or not, is our Farm Bill. So the Farm Bill is something that's passed at a national level, so in Washington, D.C., that affects our entire country. And though it seems like it was, eons ago, we need to be reminded of, not just the Dust Bowl of the late 20s, early 30s, and how this came about, saying, hey, we need to do something before our topsoil blows away. That is our bread and butter of our country. Our food and fiber is the quality of soil we have. And so policy absolutely has the ability to impact how much funding is directed towards conservation things, be it a benefit to the land, the water recharge, the resiliency of our vegetation, but also how does that vegetation impact our climate? So many of these things are interrelated. And right now, especially with our current administration, there's a lot of emphasis on climate smart practices, not only what we do now, but what we do in the future. And I don't need to get into the weeds on that, but just know that healthy conservation, healthy rangeland management is beneficial in many, many, many aspects, be it for water retention, be it for carbon sequestration, be it for many other things. And so right now with the Farm Bill coming up, that is something that gets voted on and amended every 5 years. So right now we're wrapping up our 2018 Farm Bill. And I believe that comes to an end at the end of this fiscal year, so September, here in about a month. And depending on what decisions are made across the country and voted on in Washington, D.C., that will depict on how there's programs such as CRP or the Conservation Reserve Program and others are funded for the next 5 years out? And do we have national level funding to put maybe some especially non-productive farmland or rangeland and put it to the side so we can have better water retention, we can have better grass cover, nesting cover, brood rearing cover, thermal cover for all wildlife? Do we have that ability? So yes, policy absolutely comes into place when it comes to conservation. And then, as you mentioned, Andy, those cities having those discussions on, hey, what is their drought management plan? And we know we're getting more and more people utilizing a resource. I don't want to say necessarily a finite resource, but a resource that's not necessarily increasing. How do we best manage that? Yes, we may all want to have our green yards and our swimming pools and whatever the case may be, but how do we need to responsibly utilize that resource so we can have it to satisfy all of our needs?
I think that's great. Well, as we kind of wrap things up, I just want to just express how thankful I am for being able to get you to come and sit in on a podcast with me for a while. And I thank you for being here and taking the time out of your day. I know y'all guys are extremely busy and out doing a lot of good work right now. So thanks for being here. And if you have any kind of closing remarks, or if you want to share any ways to help our listeners maybe get in touch with y'all or look up some of your information, if you want to share that with the group.
Absolutely. And Andy, I greatly appreciate the time and opportunity to be speaking with you today. Always good to catch up. And especially right before dove season. So hopefully we'll get a chance to be together this year. I tell folks, one, I know it's 100+ degrees, so likely early in the morning, get outside, go enjoy these natural resources that we're talking about, whether it be on your property or on some kind of public land. Go enjoy it, because the more you enjoy it, the more you're going to have an intent to want to do something good for it. And then two is, if you have any questions, just know that there are a lot of great resources free to landowners or free to groups that want to learn more in every county across the state. So please go reach out to your local AgriLife Extension or local Texas Parks and Wildlife biologist or local Natural Resource Conservation Service and see what they have to offer. And our team, again, with Quail Forever, we currently have team members spread out throughout the state, and we have a growing number. So we are not based in every county, but we have a growing presence in the state from the Panhandle down to deep South Texas. And if you'd like to learn more about our organization, you can go to Texas, spelled out, so TEXAS, TexasQuailForever.org. And please feel free to get in contact with me or any of my team members, and we'd love to visit with you and see how we could best help you with your conservation goals. And I guess lastly, Andy, I'd like to throw in, when you figure out that rain dance, please let the rest of us know. We'd be happy to join in on you on it.
Well, I'm looking for any help I can get. I'm sure there's a lot of folks out there that would be interested in doing a rain dance if we knew if that would make it work and bring everybody some rain. So, well, that's a wrap for today's episode of Beyond the Fence Line. I just want to give one last thank you to Thomas Janke, the Texas State Coordinator for Quail Forever and Pheasants Forever, and a good friend of mine, for shedding light on a fascinating topic of wildlife and drought in Texas. I hope you all enjoyed this episode as much as me.
Beyond the Fence Line is brought to you by the Texas Agricultural Land Trust, dedicated to conserving the Texas heritage of agricultural lands, wildlife habitats, and natural resources. Find out more at txaglandtrust.org.